We say fight back!
So we have a new video up for people who are supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program. Specifically, it's over at thomhartmann.com, talking about language, how we use language. Language matters tremendously. And we have chosen as a society, as a culture, as media, as political leadership, et cetera, not to refer to people like Steve Mnuchin, who threw thousands of people out of their homes illegally during the banking crisis, as looters. Not to refer to Rex Tillerson, whose oil company has ravaged much of the third world, literally destroying people's lives, killing people, poisoning people. We don't refer to them as looters. We don't refer to the police who go into neighborhoods and kill people, minorities, particularly African Americans. We don't refer to them as looters, stealing their lives. But when black people rise up and say, no, enough, we call them looters. There's something wrong with this. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Michael Lewis's new book, The Fifth Risk. And this is from the prologue, which is titled Lost in Transition. Chris Christie noticed a piece in the New York Times. That's how it all started. The New Jersey governor had dropped out of the presidential race in February 2016 and thrown what support he had behind Donald Trump. In late April, he saw the article. It described meetings between representatives of the remaining candidates still in the race: Trump, John Kasich, Ted Cruz, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders, and the Obama White House. Anybody who still had any kind of shot at becoming president of the United States apparently needed to start preparing to run the federal government. The guy Trump sent to the meeting was, in Christie's estimations, comically underqualified. Christie called up Trump's campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, to ask why this critical job hadn't been handed to someone who actually knew something about government. Lewandowski said, "We don't have anyone." Christie volunteered himself for the job, head of the Donald Trump presidential transition team. "It's the next best thing to being president," he told friends. "You get to plan the presidency." He went to see Trump about it. Trump said he didn't want a presidential transition team. Why did anyone need to plan anything before he actually became president? "It's legally required," said Christie. Trump asked where the money was going to come from to pay for the transition team. Christie explained that Trump could either pay for it himself or take it out of campaign funds. Trump didn't want to pay for it himself, and he didn't want to take it out of campaign funds either, but he agreed grudgingly that Christie could go ahead and raise a separate fund to pay for his transition team. But not too much, he said. And so Christie set out to prepare for the unlikely event that Donald Trump would one day be elected president of the United States. Not everyone in Trump's campaign was happy to see him on the job. In June, Christie received a note from Trump advisor Paul Manafort. "The kid is paranoid about you," Manafort said. The kid was Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. Back in 2005, when he was U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, Christie had prosecuted and jailed Kushner's father, Charles, for tax fraud. Christie's investigation revealed in the bargain that Charles Kushner had hired a prostitute to seduce his own brother-in-law, whom he suspected of cooperating with Christie, had videotaped the sexual encounter and sent the tape to his sister. The Kushners apparently took their grudges seriously, and Christie sensed that Jared still harbored one against him. On the other hand, Trump, whom Christie considered almost a friend, couldn't have cared less. He'd invited Christie to his and Melania's wedding, and he pressed him to attend his daughter Ivanka and Jared Kushner's wedding. "That would be awkward," said Christie. "I'm paying for the wedding, and I don't give an S," said Donald. Christie viewed Jared as one of those people who thinks that because he's rich, he must also be smart. Still, he had a certain cunning about him. And Christie soon found himself reporting everything he did to prepare for a Trump administration to an executive committee. The committee consisted of Jared, Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, Paul Manafort, Steve Mnuchin, and Jeff Sessions. I'm kind of like the church elder who double counts the collection plate every Sunday for the pastor, said Sessions, who appeared uncomfortable with the entire situation. The elder's job became more complicated in July 2016 when Trump was formally named the Republican nominee. The transition team now moved into an office in downtown Washington, D.C. and went looking for people to occupy the top 500 jobs in the federal government. They needed to fill all of the cabinet positions, of course, but also a whole bunch of others that no one in the Trump campaign even knew existed. It's not obvious how you find the next Secretary of State, much less the next Secretary of Transportation. Never mind who should sit on the Board of Trustees of the Barry Goldwater Scholarship and Excellence in Education Foundation. By August, 130 people were showing up every day, and hundreds more working part-time at Trump Transition headquarters at the corner of 17th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. The transition team made lists of likely candidates for all 500 jobs, plus other lists of informed people to roll into the various federal agencies the day after the election to be briefed on whatever the federal agencies were doing. They gathered the names for these lists by traveling the country and talking to people, Republicans who had served in government, Trump's closest advisors, recent occupants of the jobs that needed filling. Then they set about investigating any candidates for glaring flaws and embarrassing secrets and conflicts of interest. At the end of each week, Christie handed over binders with lists of names of people who might do the job well to Jared and Donald and Eric and the others. They probed everything, says a senior Trump transition official. Who is this person? Where did this person come from? They only ever rejected one person, Paul Manafort's secretary. The first time Donald Trump paid attention to any of this was when he read about it in the newspaper. The story revealed that Trump's very own transition team, led by New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, had raised several $1 million to pay for its own staff. The moment he saw it, Trump called Steve Bannon, the chief executive of his campaign, from his office on the 26th floor of the Trump Tower and told him to come immediately to his residence many floors above. Bannon stepped off the elevator to find the governor of New Jersey seated on a sofa, being hollered at. Trump was apoplectic, actually yelling, "You're stealing my money! You're stealing my effing money! What the F is this?" Seeing Bannon, Trump turned on him and screamed, "Why are you letting him steal my effing money?" Bannon and Christie together set out to explain to Trump federal law. Months, and it continues from there. The book is The Fifth Risk by Michael Lewis. By Nathan J. Robinson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Canada Day. It is first hour Wednesday, so of course it is middays with Mark. Just a quick heads up, in our second hour, Professor DeWayne Wickham is going to be with us about how black abolitionists changed a nation. And in our third hour, Robert Weissman is going to drop by about Trump's land management, climate-denying extremist, crazy appointments, and it is wild. But anyhow, our first hour here is Congressman Mark Pocan, as always on Wednesdays, taking your calls for the hour at 202-808-9925. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the the 2nd District of the state of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. And I believe he's in Washington, D.C. right now. His website is pocan.house.gov, P-O-C-A-N, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman, welcome back. I hope you're staying safe. And what's on the top of your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, thanks. Glad to be here from Washington. Honestly, I think one of the things I'm watching with great concern is just the spike in COVID cases. The fact that, according to the New York Times, as of today, in 14 days, we have an 82% increase in cases. We're getting back up to the numbers when we closed down, and I don't think there's a lot of appetite to fully close down, but there certainly should be appetite to do something as simple as wearing a damn mask. And unfortunately, we're still fighting too many trends there. The good news, I guess, looking for good news, is Mike Pence wore a mask this weekend Mitch McConnell made a statement about wearing masks. So did Lamar Alexander. I think we're starting to see even Donald Jr. in a tweet said something about masks. Maybe we're having a breakthrough where this isn't political, whether to wear one or not. I would be fine if we issue red and blue ones, if that's what people want. As long as we're wearing a mask, that would be fine. But, we've been told by doctors that have appeared before my appropriations committee that 70 to 80% of people wear a mask in public, we wouldn't have a resurgence. And right now, the numbers really worry me for unemployment, for small business survival, for deaths that could occur, even though more of the people being affected right now are younger. So just really a lot of concern I'm having around this.
Yeah. There's just some remarkable statistics on this. If you are interacting with a person who is infectious, who has COVID and doesn't realize it, and you're wearing a mask, that cuts your probability of transmission down to only 70%. So,
yeah.
But if the person with COVID is wearing a mask and you're wearing a mask, the probability of transmission is 1.5%. I mean, it becomes almost nothing. And just that simple thing of both people wearing a mask, if just the person with COVID is wearing the mask, that reduces the transmission probability all the way down to 5%, even if you're not wearing a mask. But both wearing a mask, 1.5%. It's incredible. It's just incredible.
Yeah, and we don't have a movement for liberty in this country to be able to shop barefoot. We accept that you have to have shoes to go into a store, right? Why can't we just accept that you wear a mask into any store or a public place? I mean, it seems so logical, and yet the president still, he himself, has not been adult enough yet to take on this responsibility. But seeing others, I am a little bit gratified by that, although I think it may be, again, too little, too late. We're now in middle of this again. And, I think we talked a little last week. I don't know if you saw, but starting today, American Airlines and I believe United Airlines are both doing 100% full planes. Only Delta is keeping the middle seats open. And again, we have to be so much smarter than we're being as a country. It's bad enough the guy on top is being stupid on this issue, as well as a few others. We don't need everyone else to follow that stupidity in their own behavior.
Yeah, especially when we're bailing these big corporations out. It's nuts.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's pick up phone calls here.
Yeah.
Beth in Seattle, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. Thank you for all your good work, both of you. I was curious to see if anybody is worried about what Putin might do if Trump looks like he's not going to be reelected, or if he's not reelected. And I'll take my answer off the air. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, what Putin will do in either case, I don't know. I think Putin is just, personally, I don't think he has an emotional attachment to Donald Trump like Donald Trump has to him. Donald Trump seems to admire the strongman dictator types. But when it comes to Putin, he's just, in many ways, I think he just likes to play with the U.S., right? That's part of his sport, and he likes to manipulate elections and things. And I don't know if there's, again, a great attachment to Donald Trump. Donald Trump certainly is trying to do that attachment, I think, personally for his business, for his hotels and things. But I think they'll just move on to whatever they're going to do next in trying to continue to mess with democracies in that way. And I'm not going to, I guess, be greatly surprised with whatever reaction they might have. I think we just have to get a grasp on our democracy. We have to make sure that people can vote in November and do it safely, and I think we've got a lot to take care of on our end.
Omar in Herndon, Virginia, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Tom, thank you for the platform. Mr. Pocan, thank you so much for making yourself available. I have adopted you as my representative, and you're going to adopt me as your constituent. Deal. My question to you is regarding the kids at the border, at the detention center, the court order their release. Have they been released, and what's the process? How are they going to be released? Are they going to be released in the U.S., or are they going to be sent back to their homeland?
Yeah, Omar, I wish I could give you more information. I don't believe that they have been released yet, and I don't have an answer to the second part about where they'll be released. I would assume that the Trump administration is going to continue to try to doing the wrong thing. In other words, what they started doing on this, and we probably are going to have additional lawsuits and fights to try to get to the right spot. But, especially in the time of COVID, I mean, this is just, even more inhumane than normal for Donald Trump, and the fact that we can't get more of an outcry from Republicans in Congress is really, again, greatly concerning. This is real people's lives, and unfortunately, as all too often, Republicans only react when someone they know is affected, and it may take a while to get them to do the right thing in this area.
Bob in Wheeling, Illinois, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning or afternoon, whichever it is there. Tom has broached the subject of the possibility of states not certifying an election result and sending that to the Congress, House of Representatives. Okay, can one state do that, or does it take a majority of states? How would that work? It's obviously very concerning.
Yeah, Tom would have a better answer for you than I would on it. I know that just this week, though, on a call that I was on with a smaller group of members of Congress, this issue did come up. So people are definitely, aware and watching it. I still don't think it's in the likely mode of anything that's going to happen. However, we have to be ready for obviously every scenario with someone who doesn't live by the rules or thinks that they're above the rules. But Tom, you might have a better answer on the specifics of if it's one state or many that have to do this.
Just very quickly, I wrote an op-ed about this a couple of months ago. In the election of 1876, Sam Tilden actually won both the Electoral College and the majority of the popular vote. But because his Electoral College victory was one vote short of being 50% plus one, the election got thrown to the House of Representatives, which is what the 12th Amendment stipulates. And in the House, each state has one vote. And right now, there's more than 30 states controlled by Republicans. So if it went to the House, Donald Trump would get reelected. And the thing that caused that crisis was that 4 states, Oregon, Mississippi, Florida, and Georgia, I believe it was, said that because of the occupation of Union forces, they refused to certify the vote. Gotcha. And if they don't certify the vote, they don't hit the electoral 50%. And then it goes to the House. And that's if just Texas and Florida do this year, then Donald Trump gets elected by the House of Representatives. Anyhow, we'll be right back. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us taking your calls for the hour. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back. I should add, Congressman, and mostly for our listeners, I know you're familiar with most of this history, but in that election of 1876, where Sam Tilden won both the popular vote and the electoral vote, the actual person who became president was Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican. And it was because he cut a deal with the Democrats that he would withdraw all the Union forces from the South, which they felt probably a Democrat couldn't get away with because the Democrats were aligned with the South. He cut that deal, and that was the end of Reconstruction. He stabbed African Americans in the back, metaphorically, politically. But it was just an amazing, amazing time.
Gotcha. Yeah, no. And that's helpful, Tom, because I didn't have that additional information. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Margot in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. Margot, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, I'm concerned about what if this idiot cancels the vote in November, and then also can't we get him out on the 25th Amendment? This man is not real. I have been battling, calling representatives, both parties, for 3.5 years. Please give me some hope.
Yeah, Margot, on the 25th Amendment, I'm not going to be able to give you a lot of hope because it's his cabinet that he appointed, and we know he only brings in the best people, according to himself. And, the fact that the people who are still with him at this point tells you kind of what the best people are, and I don't think you're going to see them enact the 25th Amendment. However, I do think that, we're watching a lot of cracks starting to form among Republicans that they see they could lose the Senate, and they're going to lose more than I think they anticipated. Liz Cheney most recently has been pretty outspoken. I've watched, Lamar Alexander this week say the president should start wearing a mask. I've watched, a few others. And I think, they're, as I mentioned earlier, Republicans generally react when they're affected or someone they know is affected. They don't have empathy, I think, in the same way that Democrats do when we deal with policy. And, the fact that they're starting to feel affected by what could be coming in November may change their tune a little bit. I don't think Donald Trump's going to be able to get away with trying to call off an election. So, I don't think I'll be wrong on this. Again, we're ready for many scenarios, but I think we're in a place where the best thing we can do is just be ready to organize people to vote in November, no matter where you live, no matter what the laws are. We're going to have to find ways to make sure that we have turnout.
Don in Sheridan, Iowa, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for being on the only news program in the whole country, sad to say. But two questions. Now, I heard on Fox News, the guy said that they're talking about 7,000 beds, and he said not only, but 1,200 were the virus. And so when they say that beds of this and that, what are they talking about? And also, how do they come up with the count? I didn't know they could add a one-day test. I'll take it off the air. And thank you for being there. Bye.
Yeah, thank you, Don. I'm not sure if I fully got your question, though. I apologize if you're still... the music.
We're hitting the break, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think he was just, he was talking about a story on Fox, and I didn't get which state he was talking about.
Okay, all right.
Are they actually running out of ice? Yeah. I think Fox News is trying to minimize the whole ICU bed thing here.
What ICU beds?
Yeah, right, exactly. We'll be right back with Congressman Pocan. Stick around. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So back in 2018, Bayer, the German pharmaceutical company, bought Monsanto, the American chemical and pesticide company, and, God only knows what else, seeds and whatnot. Anyhow, Bayer bought them for $63 billion. Bayer just very recently set aside $10 billion to cover the cost of consumers, people in their homes, who bought Roundup and got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer, from Roundup, this product that Monsanto makes that Bayer now is responsible for. $10 billion. The kicker is that the home use of Roundup only represents about 10% of Monsanto's sales of this product, glyphosate. It's amazing. There's a whole video about this for the people who support our program over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out over there. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Cliff in Cleveland, Ohio, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. Joe Biden is in the process of selecting his VP candidate. As a progressive, Elizabeth Warren is a known quantity, and the other women of color that are in the running are kind of unknown. Can the congressman speak to the credentials of the black women as to their progressive candidate? Progressive. Oh, geez. Thank you. You know what I'm talking about.
Thank you, Cliff.
Have a great day.
Got it. Progressive credentials, yeah.
Yeah, I hear you, Cliff. I think I understand what you're asking. So let me answer it this way, and this is probably not the way you'd really like to have it answered, Cliff. I'm just going to apologize because I don't really want to comment on every potential candidate. I think the folks that are being considered the two most progressive are Elizabeth Warren and Tammy Baldwin. I have been very transparent that, I've known Tammy for close to 30 years. Wisconsin's a must-win state. She won the state by 11 points. She's a progressive. She's smart. She's compassionate. She would be an amazing vice president. I think Elizabeth Warren would be an amazing vice president. And I think a number of the other folks they're looking at. But on progressive credentials alone, those are, I think, the two most progressive people that are being, considered seriously at this point. And, Cliff, I think on other candidates, there's pluses and minuses on everybody, and I think that's what they're trying to determine. So let's just see, maybe if they start narrowing it down a little more and we can kind of comment. But right now, I think there's still a list that I keep seeing of about 10 or 12 names.
Joe in Minneapolis, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes.
Joe, your phone is breaking up so badly I can't hear it. Joe's on line 3, Joyce, if you want to catch him and figure out what's going on. Brian in Lake Worth, Florida, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, good afternoon. Yes, my question is this. During the last election, it was learned that the candidate Trump had foreign help, and especially from different countries, but especially from Russia. And everybody said, "Oh my God, how terrible is such a thing? This should never happen." Okay, so here we are approaching the next election. What has been done for consequences to any candidate running for president if it's found out before the election, during, or after the election that he has accepted foreign aid? Is there anything? As far as I know, even though we say it's terrible, we seem to accept it, and we just let life go on.
And if I can add to Brian's question, sure. Congressman, we just new reporting here. This is Mark Warner talking about this. He had put in this provision into the Senate Intelligence Bill that is the rider to the Defense Appropriation Bill that must pass, saying that it's illegal for a campaign to take money from foreign governments. Marco Rubio apparently stripped that out. And Marsha Blackburn, whenever he tried to introduce it as a standalone piece of legislation, blocked the bill repeatedly back in June of 2019. What's the deal? Why are Republicans opposed to blocking foreign intervention in U.S. elections? Yeah, I mean,
it's kind of a pathetic way to try to, save the president some embarrassment, which they're all, desperate to do. I still think it is against the law. I always have thought to take money from foreign nationals. So I think that is about the only real protection that you have in place. But Brian's largely correct in that, there's help and there's help, right? I mean, Donald Trump, when he says he wants help, I don't know if there was a direct coordination with the campaign or not, but clearly what they did on social media was done to suppress votes and cause problems among types of voters. I guess where we have had some progress is, and we need a lot more on this, is getting some of the social media platforms to be better at self-policing so they can't be manipulated in a way that tries to manipulate American voters. But, ultimately, at the end of the day, if people are fine with Donald Trump, taking assistance from foreign governments, breaking the law, not following the emoluments clause. I mean, if they're so desperate to take anything that he does, as long as people who are Caucasian are in charge of things, I don't know what we can do to that type of, racism that's in some people's heads. And there is a factor of his voters that's the only thing that matters. But I would hope that for thinking people, maybe suburban voters, independent voters, and others, hopefully they'll see this as something you don't want to have in a leader literally begging for help from whether it be Russia, China, or anywhere else.
Congressman, we just have 30 seconds to the break. Do you, Trump is going all in on monuments and base names. Do you think that the electorate has changed so much that Nixon and Reagan's essentially Southern strategy won't work this time?
Yeah, I mean, I look at the polling, especially on this issue, and independents, it was a 20-point spread. Even among, we have more Republicans than you see a break on almost any other issue. The good thing that I was heartened by is not as many people really are, going to be appealing to racist messages. In fact, they think that we thought we resolved this in the 60s, and we clearly haven't, and we better get it done now, and there seems to be an urgency on it. So I do think that that's going to work with us. One of the reasons why I'm mildly intrigued by the mayor of Atlanta as people look at her as a vice president. There's just, I think there is a way we can make a good case in the South.
Yeah, thank you. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour. Our book in today's Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Harvey Kaye. Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again. This is from the introduction. On December 1st, 1862, in the midst of the Civil War, just weeks before he was to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his annual message to Congress. Lincoln firmly believed that the United States had an historic responsibility to demonstrate to the world that people can govern themselves, make equal rights not just a self-evident truth, but a manifest one, and create a political and economic order in which working people, both white and black, are not compelled to bow to anyone, neither aristocrats nor capitalists. Empowered by tens of thousands of black slaves who were already liberating themselves from bondage by escaping to the Union lines, and increasingly confident that the majority of his fellow Americans would recognize the truth of what he was saying, Lincoln closed his address by calling on them to see that the time had come to remember who they were and what they demanded, or what that demanded. He told them that to save the nation and all that it represented, they must live up to the nation's declared revolutionary purpose and promise, and act to radically enhance American freedom by bringing an end to slavery. This is a quote from Lincoln's address. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. We know how to save the Union. The world knows we do know how to save it. We, even we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. We too, end of quote from Lincoln, back to Harvey. We too cannot escape history. Our own struggle to save the nation and the promise it proclaims has begun. Finally, after more than 40 years of fear-driven class war and culture war campaigns against the democratic achievements of generations, the hard-won rights of workers, women and people of color, and the very memory of how they were secured, and now both in the wake of the election debacle of 2016, which gave the presidency to the corrupt, mendacious, racist, sexist, and treacherous demagogue Donald Trump, and continued control of Congress to the formerly conservative but increasingly reactionary Republican Party, and in the face of intensified class and culture war campaigns, we the people have come not only to recognize that American democratic life is in jeopardy, but also to mobilize in hopes of saving it. Millions of us have rallied to the resistance and expressed our democratic fears and desires in action. In the historic Women's March and March for Our Lives of young people, the protests, demonstrations, and legal actions to defend the lives and rights of immigrants and refugees, the Me Too movement to combat sexual assault and harassment, the massive teacher strikes for higher pay and better funding of public schools in states red and blue, and the enthusiastic canvassing and campaigning for a blue wave to win back Congress in the 2018 midterm elections. But resistance is not enough. The time has come for us to remember who we are and what that demands. The time has come for us to embrace our radical history, the history of how a generation of Americans, high and low and in all their diversity, not only turned their colonial rebellion into a war for independence, but also imbued American life, whether they all intended it or not, with radical imperative and impulse by declaring a revolutionary promise of freedom, equality, and democracy for all. The history of how generations of radicals and reformers served as the prophetic memory of that promise, and how generations of ordinary men and women, native-born and immigrant, struggled to make real the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to expand not only the we in We the People, but also the powers of the people. And most especially in view of the crises we ourselves face, the history of how our greatest generations confronted and prevailed over the forces that threatened to destroy the nation and bury its revolutionary promise in the 1770s, 1860s, and 1930s and 1940s, not to mention the 1960s. by acting to make the United States, both inspired by Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, and pushing them to go farther than they might otherwise have gone, radically freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. The time has come to take hold of that history and make America radical again. I've titled this collection of my speeches and essays, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, for reasons that will become obvious, and yet I cannot help but confess that if I had had to title it otherwise, I would have been sorely tempted to use, with full attribution, the title Max Lerner gave to his 1938 work, It Is Later Than You Think, The Need for a Militant Democracy. While it may not seem so, the crisis we face is no less demanding of action, urgent action, than that which confronted his generation. The book Take Hold of Our History by Harvey J. Kaye. On the Science Revolution this week, Dr. Michael Mann with the Earth Systems Science Center at Penn State University is here on the impact of the Arctic hitting a whopping 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, the hottest temperature on record for the Arctic. Should we be worried? Professor Jeffrey D. Sachs drops by on COVID-19 reversing globalization. And the Toxics Program advocate with U.S. Public Interest Research Group, Danielle Melgar, is on the show. Why are we ignoring rocket fuel in our drinking water? Tune in wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And Patrick in Seaside, California, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman Pocan. My question is, if the election goes to the House of Representatives, but the Democrats hold on to the House, how does Trump still win? I'm confused about that.
Yeah, Patrick. So I think the theory, and again, I still think it's a pretty remote theory. So I would much rather people organize around getting people out to vote in November than worrying about this scenario, because other people who can worry about this scenario are working on it. It would be then up to the states. So if in Wisconsin, for example, Donald Trump lost it, let's just say this time by 100,000 votes, but because 5 of our 8 members of the House are Republicans because of gerrymandering, those 5 people could vote for Wisconsin's votes to go to Donald Trump. That's what happened in that election that was mentioned earlier. So, but again, I think the single best thing we can do, rather than having some angst over something that we can't have direct control over, we really can have direct control over getting people to make sure they're registered and they're getting absentee ballots and they're getting to vote in the November elections. And I just really want to stress that because, people are aware of this, people are looking at it, and they're going to be ready. But the best thing we can do where we need people power is making sure we've got people voting.
Pauline in Atlanta, Georgia, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. Tom, I found your station, and I really enjoy listening to you.
Thank you, Pauline.
I have, I guess, 3 questions. The first one, you guys kind of touched on a little bit already. I had heard that the bill that the Senate is getting ready to sign and send over to the president for his signature about changing the names of the bases. They have actually put in that bill that they do not have to announce when they give foreign money in elections. They do not have to announce that they're getting foreign money in the elections. And so, of course, he's going to sign that bill because he's getting foreign money in his election. That's the first question. The second one...
Pauline, we just get one question per person, but thank you. Congressman?
Yeah. So, Pauline, I think I have some good news for you because the bill that the Senate's doing doesn't go just to the president because we haven't done that bill yet in the House. We'll be doing that in July. And very likely we're not going to have similar language around a number of these areas. So because of that, eventually there'll be a House and a Senate bill. It'll have to go to conference committee, and then it'll go to the president. So we've got some time, and I don't think the House of Representatives is going to allow anything. The Democratic control of the House is going to allow some of that language that the Senate put in there. So I think you can be a little rest assured that, we're still going to make sure we're doing our due diligence in July, but this isn't automatically going to the president for a signature.
Tasha in Atlanta, Georgia, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My question is about the federal student loans that were supposed to be suspended because of the CARES Act during the pandemic. I have two student loan servicers. One of them did it with no problem, but the second one didn't, and they keep telling me that my federal loans don't qualify. So I'm confused about that, because I thought all federal loans did. I'm not sure what I need to do. If there's some federal loans that were not covered, depending on who the servicer is.
Yeah, Tasha, what I would do, just because I don't know the particulars of your case, is you should get the types of loans that you have, because there could be private versus quasi-public loans, and there could be some differences. And then call your member of Congress or the Senate, and they can help do it as a casework issue, because it could. My guess is it's just you have one loan provider who's trying to basically not follow the law. I talked to a friend yesterday in Arizona who mentioned that they were working at a Target, and they got notified that they had contact with someone with COVID in their workplace, and yet they weren't telling them not to come in. They were telling them they still have to come in, and I don't think that is something you're supposed to do either. Yet I didn't realize at Target you sign a non-disclosure and you can't say this stuff publicly, which I didn't think Target was one of those types of corporations, but apparently they are. So, I just think sometimes it's just bad corporate behavior, not trying to follow the laws that we place. But you can get a little more help by having your member of Congress make some of those calls. First, to find out if the loan qualifies. Second, make that company, if they're not doing their jobs, do their job. And I would recommend you're a case for doing this filing this as a casework file.
Chris in Corrales, New Mexico, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you for taking my call. The question I have is, the Constitution now just seems to be a paper tiger with the kind of leadership we have. What's Congress doing to prevent this from occurring again and enforcing the Constitution against a rogue president?
And specifically in what area, Chris? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I dropped Chris.
Because it was a little general, so I didn't quite exactly know what he was referring to.
Yeah,
I apologize.
It was. Okay. Sorry. Andy in Jonestown, Pennsylvania, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, hello?
Andy? Yeah, you're on the air.
I'm here.
Andy.
I'm here. Okay, I'm looking at these voting machines. I mean, they've been rigged in 2016. Why? And I'm not hearing the Democratic by engaging in a discussion comparing the reliability of the voting machines, which are hackable, and they're probably trying to hack as we speak, or working on plans to hack them as we speak, and the security of mail-in voting. I think we should have a national discussion about the security of these things.
Yeah. So, first of all, Andy, I follow this fairly close, and I don't think we have that much reason to believe that there has been a direct hacking of machines. We know that there were attempts to. In fact, almost every single state, I think, in major metro area, there was an attempt to, but they weren't necessarily successful. It is important, though, and this is why I've had legislation that got introduced in and included in the H.R. 1 in another bill, that you have a paper ballot with an electronic voting machine. So you have a verifiable receipt that you can hand count, and that helps to, one, avoid fraud, but two, gives you that extra security. Your ballot matters. But I think another thing you bring up, Andy, is just this absolutely ridiculous argument the Republicans are making that you can't trust mail-in voting, when, of course, almost all of them have voted by mail. We just had a analysis in Wisconsin, and I'm going to probably lowball the number, but I thought it was over 90%, but I'm going to say it's at least 80% of Republican lawmakers who didn't want to have vote by mail voted by absentee in the elections this spring. So it's always don't do what I do what I tell you to do all too often with these elected officials. And, I think we need to stand up to that argument about fraud and vote by mail because it's absolutely false. And I think, the best thing we can do, even more than worrying about machines right now, is worrying about people, getting them to vote early so they don't have to show up, because we don't know what it's going to look like on Election Day. So the best thing we can do is get those absentee ballots and get people requesting those.
Sharon in Greenville, South Carolina. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, Tom, thank you and Representative Pocan for taking my call. I've been trying to get on for so long. To add to what your previous caller just said, I am in South Carolina. I asked for an absentee vote, okay? They send you an application, and you fill it out for you to receive an absentee vote in the mail. And there's a questionnaire on it. You have to be a registered voter. And you have to send that back in for them to send you an absentee vote. And if you're 65 years or over, it's automatically marked if you prefer to vote absentee. My question that I actually had for you was, with this pandemic rising and going on, and you have Republican mayors, governors.
Sharon, we have less than a half a minute till we're going to hit a break. Can you get right to the question, please?
Okay. Well, my question is, it's not like the flu. It's not just going away as they're trying to make people believe. This is a pandemic. And unless you stop it, it will keep going until it kills everyone. So thank you for being there, and thank you.
Okay. Your thoughts on Sharon's comments, Congressman?
Yeah, I think her comments were essentially around why we want to be able to vote absentee. Some states are going to send out a form that you can request one automatically. We're doing that in Wisconsin, for example, even with a gerrymandered legislature. Our elections commission did that, and others will have to request it. But whatever the laws in our area, we have to do to make sure people are getting ballots.
Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House. His website, Pocan, POCAN.house.gov, and you can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan. And welcome back. Ishmael in Riverside, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, good morning, guys. Thanks for taking my call. Basically my question is, what can Congress, particularly the Progressive Caucus, do to ensure that there's more Hispanic representation in media, particularly on the left?
I'm not sure if you're asking we can't legislate something, I don't think, around this, but I think, what we've been trying to do just through advocacy in general is, promote diversity, and obviously media is one of the areas that we need to promote it more than many other areas because it's such a visible face to the country. So, I think the more we help, make sure that there's diversity on panels that are interviewing us as candidates, I think is one way. There's an effort around having women be more involved in government. I'm forgetting the project's name, but Don Beyer, one of my colleagues, has mentioned this because he's a part of it, that people agree that if there's a panel they're on, unless there's a woman on the panel, they won't speak at that panel. And I think that's a good initiative, right, to show people that we have to have proper representation on panels so we don't just keep doing the same old. And maybe that's one of the areas where we can start doing that more with whether it be interviews or, things that we can probably have a little more control on, candidate forums, et cetera. And that could be an idea.
Mark in Gutine, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, good morning, fellas. Thanks for taking my call. I have a couple of just one statement and one question. My statement is I'd love to see Elizabeth Warren as VP, Kamala Harris as AG, and Susan Rice as Secretary of State. Also, my question, real quick, and I'll take this off the air, is what is happening with the extended benefit for unemployment in the Congress? Thanks, guys, and hope you have a good day. Thank you.
Yeah, Mark, probably one of the most important questions, right, given where we're at in the country. And, we're still waiting for the Republicans to say that they're going to do another COVID bill. And Mitch McConnell has been almost negligently silent or not very outspoken on this. And we need them to come to the table. I believe that because the extended monies are running out on July 25th, that will bring people to the table. I think the fact that southern states, Republican states, are having a surge in coronavirus cases. Again, Republicans only act when something affects them or someone they know. That may make them do something. But we need to have a bill before the end of July go through both houses of Congress that protects people on unemployment, and we would like to see that additional money continued, that helps small businesses, because right now I think 30 or 40% of businesses could likely close if we don't do something, and protect our frontline workers and gets money to state and local government. So it's much of what we did in the HEROES Act, but through negotiation with the Senate. We just need the interest from the Senate to do it, and I think that they will have to act, because that's one of the biggest issues that's going to be out there. July 25th, that surge money runs out, and I don't think you want to do that abrupt of a cliff.
Congressman, we got 10 seconds. Do you think this is going to happen soon, or are they going to take it to the last minute?
Unfortunately, everything I've seen in Congress happens at the last minute, so I'm going to bet my money on last minute.
Yeah, there you go. So later this month. Congressman Mark Pocan with us, taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back with more of your calls for the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus right after this. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program. And there's a really troubling concatenation of events events that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE or whoever's running them to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. Justin in Norman, Oklahoma. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, fellas. Thanks for taking my call. I want to make a sarcastic point or an ironic point first, and then followed up by a question. So my ironic point is that Republicans love to take such pride in honoring our military members for taking the ultimate sacrifice of going to war to defend their fellow citizens, which is well taken. But these same people can't be bothered to take the most basic sacrifice of wearing a face mask to protect their fellow citizens. And I think that's highly ironic and troubling. And then my actual question is, I think so much of politics and the civil discourse these days is around messaging. And I'm wondering what we're going to do when Trump starts to debunk the mail-in ballots, if we do need to move to that. What are the Democrats willing or ready to do to battle that messaging?
Yeah, good question, Justin. So first of all, I mean, the good news is we have actual states like Oregon and other places that have, or Oregon, I'm sorry, I have a real family out there, I should say it the correct way, who have done this for a long time and can point to the lack of any voter fraud and the fact that this works, and they have incredibly high turnout and great satisfaction among the people who are voting that way. So, Donald Trump will continue to, Donald Trump lies like some people breathe or drink water, right? So you're never going to stop him from lying, but I think we can at least, to anyone who's thinking, share the thoughts that this isn't a problem. And again, in states like Wisconsin, where we had a vote in April in the middle of the pandemic, 71% of people voted via absentee, including that meant Republicans and independents. That's the preferred way to vote rather than getting sick and potentially dying. So I think we can make a pretty strong case, and we just need to be able to be that blunt, I think, in making the case.
David in Spotswood, New Jersey. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, good afternoon. My question is about private equity, and I'll be brief. Paul Wellingstone in Call 11 has been touching this issue. In the beginning of June, the Labor Department is now allowing the private equity to get 401k money, and this is on top of the $4 trillion they have as of 2017 and defined benefits from all the states and whatnot. Can something be done with the carried interest rule, which allows them to do long-term capital gains for their income, and also legislating what they do with that money? I mean, there was a report to Congress from the 2010 financial crisis that showed that low tax states greatly impacted, enhanced by derivatives, caused our financial crisis 10 years ago. And from what I've seen on TV, they're all happy to do it again. Thanks.
Yeah, David, so your question is one of those classic can and will. Can Congress do it? Yes. Will Congress do it because of Mitch McConnell leading the Senate? No. I don't see them doing things to rein in private equity firms. And, right now we're seeing continued and additional abuses by private equity firms. We could have an hour-long conversation just on why some of these larger firms especially are just doing things that are not in anyone's interest but the few people who are making money from that firm, and yet Congress won't stand up to them. I certainly don't think Mitch McConnell will do anything. So, yes, are there ways we could put controls on them? You bet. And we've even introduced some legislation with Elizabeth Warren to do just that. Unfortunately, Mitch McConnell's not going to do anything around this.
Mary in Flatwoods, Kentucky. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, gentlemen, and thank you for your time. I have 2 kids in high school, and I'm concerned about them returning in August. The football team has been practicing, and on Monday, a child tested positive with the numbers skyrocketing. Do you see any changes in them going back to school?
Honestly, I don't know, and I think this is probably going to be a decision state by state, maybe even locality by locality, and unfortunately in places it's really going to depend on what the political jurisdiction in your area might say on this. Even though people that I respect, like Dr. Fauci and Dr. Scott Gottlieb, and others, haven't been definitive yet on the answer. I think we're still in a little bit of a wait and see. I mean, right now, if everyone started wearing masks and if the president actually stood up and did something presidential to unite the nation, we might be able to get the numbers to go down by then. But short of some of those things happening, it's going to be less likely some of the things that we planned on happening late August and September are going to be able to happen. But I don't know if I have a definitive answer because I haven't heard from the people I trust yet, but it largely will be a decision made by the political jurisdiction that you're living in, and you probably have a better idea if it's a red, blue, or more balanced, one where you're going to have this debate and try to convince people.
Congressman, thanks so much for dropping by today. It's always great having you on.
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you so much. Take care.
Yep. Have a great afternoon. Congressman Mark Pocan, pocan.house.gov. You can check out his website, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. We'll be back. We're going to talk about, what's going on in America, broadly speaking, and how black abolitionists changed our nation with Professor DeWayne Wickham right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com.
Thank you.
Today we're reading from Dorfman and Mallart's book, How to Read Donald Duck, Imperialist Ideology in the Disney Comic. And this is from the preface to the English edition. This book was first published in Spanish. To say that this book was burnt in Chile should not come as a surprise to anyone. Hundreds of books were destroyed and thousands more prohibited and censored. It was written in the middle of 1971, in the middle of the Chilean revolutionary process. Copper had been rescued. The land was being returned to the peasantry. The whole Chilean people were recovering the industries that during the 20th century had been the means of enrichment for Mr. Rockefeller, Grace, Guggenheim, and Morgan. Because this process was intolerable to the United States government and its multinational corporations, it had to be stopped. They organized a plan which at the time was suspected and since has been confirmed by Mr. Kissinger, Ford, and Colby to have been directed and financed by the United States intelligence services. Their objective was to overthrow the constitutional government of Chile. To realize their objective, an invisible blockade was imposed. Credits were denied, spare parts purchased for industrial machinery were not sent, and later the Chilean state bank accounts in the U.S. were blocked, and an embargo preventing the sale of Chilean copper throughout the world was organized. There were, however, 2 items which were not blocked: planes, tanks, ships, and technical assistance for the Chilean armed forces, and magazines, TV serials, advertising, and public opinion polls for the Chilean mass media, which continued for the most part to be in the hands of a small group which was losing its privileges. To maintain them with those of the U.S., their media prepared the climate for the bourgeois insurrection, which finally materialized some years later on the 11th of September, 1973. Each day, with expert U.S. advice, in each newspaper, each weekly, each monthly magazine, each news dispatch, each movie, and each comic book, their arsenal of psychological warfare was fortified. In the words of General Pinochet, the point was, quote, to conquer the minds, end quote, while in the words of Donald Duck in the magazine Dislandia, published in December 1971, coinciding with the first mass rallies of native fascism, the so-called March of the Empty Pots and Pans, the point was to, quote, restore the king. But the people did not want the restoration of the king, nor of the businessman. The popular Chilean cultural offensive, which accompanied the social and economic liberation, took multiple forms: wall paintings, popular papers, TV programs, motion pictures, theater, songs, literature. In all areas of human activity, with differing degrees of intensity, the people expressed their will. Perhaps the most important arm of this offensive was the work of the state publishing house, Quimantu, a word meaning sunshine of knowledge in the language of the Chilean Machupe Indians. In 2.5 years, it published 5 million books, twice the amount that had been published in all of Chile during the previous 70 years. In addition, it transformed the content of some of the magazines it had inherited from before the popular unity government and created new ones. It is in this multifaceted context, with the people on the march to cultural liberation, a process which also meant criticizing the mass cultural merchandise exported so profitably by the U.S. into the Third World, that How to Read Donald Duck was generated. We simply answered a practical need. It was not an academic exercise. For the Mad Dog Warriors on that September 11th, there were no paintings on the walls. There were only enormous stains which dirtied the city in memory. They, using the fascist youth brigades, whitewashed all the signing, many-colored walls of the nation. They broke records, murdered singers, destroyed radios and printing presses, imprisoned and executed journalists, so that nothing would be left to remind anybody of anything about the struggle for national liberation. But it was not enough to clean these cultural stains from the street. The most important task was to eliminate all those who bore the stain inside themselves: the fighters, workers, peasants, employees, students, and patriotic soldiers, to eliminate these creators of a new life, to eliminate this new life which grew, and for all that we created. This book, conceived for the Chilean people and our urgent needs, produced in the midst of our struggle, is now being published far from Chile in the uncle land of Disney, behind the barbed wire network of ITT. Mr. Disney, we are returning your duck, feathers plucked and well roasted. Look inside, you can see the handwriting on the wall, our hands still writing on the wall, Donald, to go home. This is written in 1975. And then this from David Kunzel's introduction. The names of the presidents change. That of Disney remains. 46 years after the birth of Mickey Mouse, 8 years after the death of his master, Disney's may be the most widely known North American name in the world. He is arguably the century's most important figure in bourgeois popular culture. He has done more than any single person to disseminate around the world certain myths upon which that culture has thrived, notably that of an innocence supposedly universal, beyond place, beyond time, and beyond criticism. The myth of U.S. political innocence is at last being dismantled, and the reality which it masks lies in significant areas exposed to public view. But the great American dream of cultural innocence still holds a global imagination in thrall. The first major breach into the Disney of this dream was made by Richard Schickel's The Disney Version, The Life, Times, and Commerce of Walt Disney, the book How to Read Donald Duck. Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right, Jane May.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There's a lot of failure to know the history of this country, particularly when it comes to the institution of slavery and those who work to end it. On the line with us is Dean DeWayne Wickham. He is the founding dean of Morgan State University's School of Global Journalism and Communication, a retired USA Today columnist. Morgan.edu is the website. You can tweet him at DeWayne Wickham, W-I-C-K-H-A-M. Dean Wickham, welcome to the program, and thanks so much for joining us. Good morning.
Thank you.
So,
good morning, Tom.
You know, I think a lot of Americans, particularly white Americans, think that the end of the Civil War was the end of slavery, or perhaps the Emancipation Proclamation was the end of slavery. And I've had African Americans on this program suggest and heard, during Juneteenth celebration that was a celebration of, quote, the end of slavery. None of that is actually historically accurate. What do we need to know that we don't know or that we're getting wrong?
So let's start with Juneteenth, because there's a lot of pressure today to make Juneteenth a national holiday. I think 47 states now recognize it in some form as a state holiday. We need to get history right. There's a movement in this country now to take down Confederate statues. Because we want to properly reflect the history of our nation and the history of that struggle, and not give credit to the Confederacy as some kind of a not so evil force that was trying to bring about just states' rights. So as we correct that history, we also ought to make an effort to correct the history surrounding the ending of slavery, not simply because Abraham Lincoln didn't do all the credit he's been given, but largely because the driving force behind the movement to end slavery, to bring about the 13th Amendment, were abolitionists, many of whom were African Americans who struggled for decades to bring about that change. They deserve the credit, and that credit comes about as a result of the enactment of the 13th Amendment.
And that was in, 1867? was it, or
that
73?
13th Amendment was ratified on December 6, 1865. So about 6 months after the so-called Juneteenth event. You know, a lot of this is driven by the fact, we complain now that the president doesn't read much, Donald John Trump. But there are a lot of people in this country, including a lot of African Americans, who've never read the Emancipation Proclamation. And so, since
which did not end slavery.
No, it didn't. It didn't end slavery anywhere that Lincoln had the power to end slavery. It ended slavery in states that were in rebellion, but only in those sections of those states not under the control of the Union Army. So in essence, it was a war measure. It was an executive order. And after the war, a lot of people, including a lot of members of Congress, questioned whether or not it really had the effect of law after the war.
Right.
The Emancipation Proclamation took effect January 1st, 1863. The war ended in 1865, and when the war ended, people were clamoring to figure out, well, what do we do with these people who were former slaves? In states like Maryland, Delaware, West Virginia, Kentucky, so-called border states that didn't leave the Union, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't speak to that at all and didn't free anyone there. And so after the war, what was the condition of the status of the slaves? That was still to be decided, as was the status of slaves in Norfolk, Virginia, and the surrounding counties, because they had been held by the Union Army on January 1st, 1863. In New Orleans and all the surrounding parishes in Louisiana, also held by the Union Army and explicitly excluded from the Emancipation Proclamation. It's all in the reading.
Yeah. So I get it. I think a lot of Americans are familiar with Frederick Douglass or Harriet Tubman, or even Henry Box Brown, but there were a lot of black abolitionists who were working very aggressively and very successfully in many ways to end slavery or to change the national dialogue, particularly in the North, to end slavery in the United States. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. But listen, they also had some very important white allies like Charles Sumner. None of this would have happened had it not been for the insistence and the stick-to-itness of Charles Sumner, the senator from Massachusetts, who was almost beaten to death in his Senate seat during the 1850s just for speaking in opposition to slavery, beaten to death nearly with a cane by a Southern legislator. But he was the one who really championed on the legislative side the 13th Amendment. He pushed the Senate to create something called the Select Committee on Slavery, which, by the way, was created after the Emancipation Proclamation. So you see the historical trend here. Why did you need it? Because nobody in the Congress really thought that war measure was going to have a lasting effect on this nation after the hostility ended. And so that committee was created. He worked with, largely with Frederick Douglass and many other abolitionists, like the grandfather of I've lost my thought now about an actress who William Monroe Trotter, his father, William Monroe Trotter, was a famous black publisher in the 1890s and the first Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Harvard. His father was an abolitionist, struggling in that effort to bring about change. So there were a lot of people who were pushing legislators to bring about a constitutional amendment, because even the black activists didn't think that Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation had the effect of law. There were a lot of problems with it. He was taking property from people. Slaves were considered property. He was taking property from people. He was doing it unilaterally. There was no congressional law. Interestingly, before the Emancipation Proclamation came into effect, Congress actually passed a law ending slavery in the District of Columbia. So there was a law to that effect to cause that to happen, but we didn't have the force of law to support the Emancipation Proclamation. that came about as a lot of hard work by abolitionists, black and white, and members of the so-called radical Republicans in Congress.
In the minute or so we have left until we hit a hard break here, Dean Wickham, how do we stop the whitewashing of history? And I'm not just talking about, Texas school books saying that slavery was only a secondary issue in the Civil War. I mean, just the whole broader, the exclusion, by and large, of black contributions to the history of this country, particularly pre-1900.
Yeah, it really comes down to learning your history, first of all. And the greatest advocates of history are the people who are most affected by it. And so we cannot get African Americans in this country to understand that Juneteenth is a small event in a tidal wave of actions that brought about the change in this country. If we continue to agitate for Juneteenth as a national holiday, it's going to be hard to get the history right, because we're teaching. Here's the thing. I told someone the other day, if you were born on January the 1st, and someone told you on April the 15th that you were born on January 1st, what day would you celebrate as your birthday? The day someone told you were free, or the day you were actually free?
Yeah, I get it. Dean DeWayne Wickham, the founding dean at Morgan State University School of Global Journalism and Communication, morgan.edu. You can tweet him at DeWayne Wickham. Dean Wickham, thank you so much for dropping by today. It's great talking with you.
Tom, good to be with you.
Really appreciate it. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. More of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Thom Hartmann with you. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Luella in Pittsburgh, California. Hey, Luella, what's on your mind today?
Well, I like listening to your show, and it's on Pacifica Foundation radio, but I'm thinking about all the people we've lost that would have been able to vote, or, just the population that's dwindling because of voters and people that were educated, and gosh, what a loss. I mean, that's going to really put things out of balance, I guess, with people registering and having to, it's a challenge, really. And I do not want to keep the same administration for sure. I want changes.
Right, well, I think the bottom line is we all need to make sure that we're registered to vote, and ideally registered to vote by mail, by absentee ballot, because this virus is not going to go away between now and November. Yeah. Okay, Luella, thank you.
All right.
Thank you. It's nice to hear from you. Deborah in Denver. Hey, Deborah, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. As you know, I'm out here in Colorado, and I have a comment and then a question. But before that, I just want to give my pick. I would like to see Glenn Kirshner as Attorney General, Kamala Harris on Supreme Court, and those are like the two that I really think would be perfect for those positions. Okay, now, as you know, I'm in Colorado, and you know about the Keystone Pipeline and how Canada, it's a Canadian company, and Canada would not allow the Keystone Pipeline to be built out in Canada because they don't want to mess up their own landmass, and so they want it here in America. Well, John Hickenlooper is embraced it. He endorsed it, and he's not a progressive. Colorado is a Bernie Sanders loving state, and I don't understand why the progressives did not embrace Andrew Romanoff. Andrew Romanoff.
I thought they had. Was your primary yesterday? Did Hickenlooper win the primary?
He won, and I don't understand why. Because Bernie Sanders did not endorse him, and neither did AOC. And you know who endorsed John Hickenlooper? Elizabeth Warren. And I don't understand that because we have been moving in that direction for
I'm guessing, Deborah, I actually had Hickenlooper on this program. I also had Andrew Romanoff on this program, in fact, 2 or 3 times. But early on in the race, those of us who were looking at the Denver or at the Colorado race without being Coloradans, without having intimate knowledge of the local politics, it looked like Hickenlooper was the only guy who had a really serious chance of taking down Cory Gardner. And I think it was more recently, in the last few months, that it became obvious that Andrew Romanoff could probably do that maybe even more easily than Hickenlooper. But the endorsements were already in. My guess is that that's how it played out. That's certainly how it played out for me. It took me a while to learn about Romanoff.
But did AOC and hello? Are you still okay?
Yeah, I am. I would just look at when those endorsements were made, Deborah. I'm guessing that those endorsements were made very early in the race when it looked like Hickenlooper was the guy. But I don't know. I'm not a Coloradan. But it's unfortunate. It would be nice to have a really progressive senator from Colorado, but I'll take a Democrat over Cory Gardner any day. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So there's a pile of news here that I want to get to, as well as the question: how do we pry to kind of continue this issue of race in America? How do we pry the Confederate monuments out of Donald Trump's tiny hands? I mean, every time in American history that there was a possibility of a big move forward in human and civil rights in this country, there was a backlash by white racists, resulting in new monuments to the Confederacy. This happened, the Confederacy, of course, was the police state oligarchy that took over the American South in the 1820s and committed treason against the United States in the 1860s, in 1861, killing hundreds of thousands of American soldiers and civilians in the process. And that explosion of monument building, when you look at that, those monuments were not put in place after the Civil War, immediately after the Civil War. Most of them were put into place in the 1890s, when there was a kind of second wave of I was going to say abolitionist sentiment, but probably a more accurate way to say it, since slavery was technically abolished at that point, was civil rights sentiment. So then you had, Plessy versus Ferguson in 1898, and right around that time you had this explosion of monument building. And then again in the 19-teens and 1920s, when Birth of a Nation came out and Democratic President Woodrow Wilson premiered it at the White House. It was based on a book called The Klansman, and it was a recruiting film for the Klan, and it led to a whole brand new explosion of the Ku Klux Klan nationwide in the 19-teens and 20s. And so that was the second big burst of monuments being built to Confederate generals and Confederate, quote, war heroes, traitors, I would call them. And then the third big burst of Confederate monument building was in the 1960s and 70s in response to Brown v. Board, in response to the assassination of Martin Luther King, broadly in response to the civil rights movement. And these monuments are just, these are symbols of white supremacy, just being put up to shove it in the face of people who are not white. And to say, essentially white supremacists are still here, still running things. Segregation, George Wallace, segregation now, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And just like in 2016 now, Donald Trump is revisiting the George Wallace campaign and basing his, as far as I can tell, his entire presidential candidacy on a naked appeal to white racism. And he's now stepped up this campaign, his white supremacy campaign, saying that if the defense appropriation bill contains an amendment that Elizabeth Warren put forward that would require all U.S. military bases that are named after traitors to be named after actual American soldiers or whatever, anybody other than traitors. Trump says if that amendment is in the defense appropriation bill, he's going to veto it. And this is talking about must-pass legislation. This is the legislation that the Constitution says you can't have an army for more than 2 years without reappropriating money. This was, goes back to the big debate that they had back in the day about whether or not we should have a standing army. I mean, the reality is Donald Trump is not America's first white supremacist president. I think you could safely argue that every, if not the vast majority, probably every American president, right up to and through Dwight Eisenhower was a white supremacist or was fine with the white supremacy status quo. And John Kennedy began to crack that. Lyndon Johnson took a sledgehammer to it. And as a result, the Democratic Party lost the South for a generation, as Lyndon Johnson told Bill Moyers he was concerned would happen. But that's what happened. And I think that you can safely say that basically every Republican president we've had since, including Abraham Lincoln, were white supremacists. So, Donald Trump isn't our first white supremacist president, but hopefully he'll be our last. I mean, this is mind-boggling. So how do we pry these Confederate monuments out of Trump's tiny hands? Do you think that he is going to, that he's actually got, he thinks he's got a topic, a subject, an issue here, maintaining our heritage. He's been tweeting about this morning and yesterday. Heritage is code for slavery, for white supremacy, for keeping black people in their place. I mean, this is Donald Trump's world. And it's the world of his white supporters who run around with Confederate flags and things like that. But it sure seems to me like the number of those people is diminishing really rapidly, particularly as America is learning a lot of this history. So, is it going to work? We'll see. Meanwhile, Senator Elizabeth Warren just spoke with the press after leaving the SCIF, the Senate SCIF, the secure conference room, where the administration supposedly briefed the senators on what happened with the Russian bounties to kill American soldiers. And what she said as she left was there was no one there who had any information about what information was given to the president or when it was given to him. This was not a briefing. Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia said, "We did not get any direct answers, and nobody was high level enough to give us a direct answer." So it looks like Trump is tweeting that this is just a hoax, another Russia hoax, that Russia was paying to the Taliban to kill American soldiers. It seems that the evidence is there. After all, they arrested a bunch of Taliban guys, went to their house, and found $500,000 in cash, tracked back where that cash came from, and it came from a Russian intelligence unit. I mean, this, according to the New York Times, I'm not reporting this, New York Times is. So, is this going to be the thing that takes down Trump? Is it going to, pardon the pun, trump his racism? Might it cause some of his white racist followers to leave?
The Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
At least those who feel like, they really embrace the military or they have family in the military. We'll see. What do you think? We'll be right back. Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. On the Science Revolution this week, Dr. Michael Mann with the Earth Systems Science Center at Penn State University is here on the impact of the Arctic hitting a whopping 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, the hottest temperature on record for the Arctic. Should we be worried? Professor Jeffrey D. Sachs drops by on COVID-19 reversing globalization. And the Toxics Program advocate with U.S. Public Interest Research Group, Danielle Melgar, is on the show. Why are we ignoring rocket fuel in our drinking water? Tune in wherever fine podcasts are available. Hey, we have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for people who are supporters of our program. On this one, I'm digging into, or actually kind of taking issue with, a new article that's over on thenation.com, titled, Could Coronavirus End Globalization? And they've got a bunch of analysts who are weighing in on this sort of thing. And my take is that this is going to be even bigger than that. This depression that we are sliding into, it is being softened right now by the Federal Reserve throwing $6 trillion at America's largest corporations. 1/3 of all economic activity for a year in the United States. Twice the annual federal budget. The Fed has just parked $6 trillion with a couple of hundred big companies. And it's just masking what's coming. It's going to get bad, and it could become fascist. And so check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com, for the people who support our program. Thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A couple of other things that I just wanted to touch on very quickly, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. It appears that Mark Warner was the one who tried to bring this bill to the floor several times, saying that essentially, if a campaign gets help, including non-financial help, from a foreign government, they have committed a crime. So Senator Mark Warner, the Democrat from Virginia, put that into, first of all, proposed it as a standalone piece of legislation. And Senator Marsha Blackburn repeatedly killed it. She's from Tennessee, the Tennessee Republican. She blocked it over and over and over again, so it never made its way out of committee, never made its way to the floor. So then Elizabeth Warren proposed that this be attached to the Defense Appropriation Act, and Marco Rubio said, no, we're going to take it out. So here we are. Number one. Number two, we were talking in the first hour with Congressman Mark Pocan about the impact of the impact is the wrong word. Well, yeah, the impact of wearing masks. And I pointed out that if you're wearing a mask and you don't have COVID, and you're talking to somebody who does have COVID who is not wearing a mask, you have reduced the probability of transmission by about 30%. Odds are 70% chance you're going to get it from them because they're not wearing a mask. On the other hand, if a person is wearing a mask and has COVID, and you're wearing a mask and have COVID and do not have COVID, the odds of you're getting COVID from that person, instead of being 70%, are only 1.5%. Which brings us to the protests. It's been a month since the very first demonstrations, the Black Lives Matter and pushing back on police violence following the murder of George Floyd. It's been about a month since those protests, and if they were mass events spreading virus, you would expect it to be showing up now. It's not. Instead, what we're seeing are explosions of virus that seem to follow the holiday of Memorial Day 3 weeks ago, more or less. And And frankly, I think, this is the 4th of July weekend coming up. I think that 2-3 weeks down the road from now, you're going to see another pop. But what about those demonstrations? All those people out in the streets? They were literally in 140 cities and counties. Well, actually, they were in more than that, but they have now examined. Health officials in 140 cities and counties have been polled, basically, and find out what's going on here. And what they're finding is that they can't. Well, this is what one of the researchers who worked on this said. He said, "We are not aware of any place where there's been a major cluster tied to protests. We've tied more cases to a single restaurant in East Lansing, Michigan in the last week than we have to every protest in the country." What's the difference? In the protests, people were wearing masks. I mean, pretty religiously. And at that restaurant in East Lansing, Michigan, nobody was wearing a mask. Ta-da! There you go. And finally, and then I've got quite a bit of other news here, but we'll get to that in the third hour of the program. Want to make some space for your calls here. But Donald Trump ends his extra racist month with a vow to protect traitors. He has had the Department of Homeland Security create a new task force to protect monuments dedicated to traitors. Honest to God. He created a task force inside the Department of Homeland Security. It's called the Protecting American Communities Protecting American Communities Task Force, PACT, PACT. And its job is to protect monuments dedicated to traitors to the United States of America. Let that sink in. The acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, said this, quote, "The Department of Homeland Security is answering the president's call to use our law enforcement personnel across the country to protect our historic landmarks. We won't stand idly by while violent anarchists and rioters seek not only to vandalize and destroy the symbols of our nation, but to disrupt law and order and sow chaos in our communities." Really? A statue of a general who fought a war against the United States and killed American soldiers and killed American civilians is a symbol of our nation? What am I missing here? Okay, let's pick up your phone calls here. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Not much, but I think they should ban all statues. I think that they're ridiculous, unless they're art, like the Statue of Liberty or allegorical or something. But anyway, my point was that the biggest problem with the police reform that we need is police need to reside in the communities where they work. And one way to deal with it is the way the firefighters do, and it's to provide housing within the precinct where they live and work and buy at the same stores as the people they work for, and living together, they can sort out the so-called bad apples as well. I think there should be some sort of pilot program to provide money for turning precincts into living quarters. What do you think of that?
That's an interesting idea. I suspect, though, that, it's a considerable inconvenience to firefighters to have to do that. The upside is that they work. I realize it varies from city to city, all around the country, county, state, and everything else. But sometimes they work a week on, a week off, or 3 days on, 4 days off, or 2 days on, 5, whatever it is, because they're basically on duty 24 hours a day because there might be a fire. But firefighters, the number of people who are firefighters is a much smaller number than the number who are police. So. There may be some challenges there. I'm not sure, Bill.
Well, maybe they should be provided some sort of supplemental income to be able to afford to live in the communities where they serve. I think it's critical that they are familiar with the people that they are working with. And I think
I agree with you on that, Bill. I absolutely do. And I think having cops police communities where they live is an essential first step. Aaron in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Aaron, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was reading about the defense bill, and I thought I saw something in it that said that foreign money and such does not have to be reported to intelligence. So because of that, I'm wondering if President Trump would sign the bill simply so he could hide foreign money.
Yeah, it's the not the opposite of that, but it's kind of the double negative of that. Mark Warner proposed legislation, and then Elizabeth Warren actually got an amendment, out of committee that would have made it a crime for any federal political campaign to take any sort of assistance from a foreign government, and money, but also things like a million Facebook bots. And Marco Rubio and Marsha Blackburn, the Republicans from Florida and Tennessee, have been working really, really aggressively to stop that. And then Trump came out and said, if that's in the legislation, I will veto it. No, wait a minute. It was the monuments. There's so many outrages every day that all kind of mingle together. But in any case, that's what's going on, Aaron. The Republicans want Donald Trump to be able to continue getting aid from Saudi oligarchs, from Israeli oligarchs, from Russian oligarchs, from Philippine oligarchs, from Chinese oligarchs. I mean, all of these, as Seth Abramson documents in his book, Proof of Conspiracy, among others. I mean, lots and lots of reporters have documented this. Trump is getting all this support from all these foreign billionaires, essentially, and in some cases explicitly from foreign governments. It's how he became president in 2016, and he wants to pull the same trick in 2020. In fact, we now know from John Bolton's book that he sat down with President Xi of China and said, help me get reelected. Now, that should be a crime, right? But it's not. You can't, as Mark Pocan pointed out earlier, you can't specifically take money from that government, but you can take help from them. And the Republicans want to keep it that way. Why?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Because they don't love America first. It's just that simple. They prefer the oligarchs to the country. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Brian in Tacoma, listening on KBCS. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hi, thanks for taking the call. In regards to the Russia, Taliban bounty business, I'm frustrated in the last 96 hours or whatever that most people are missing the most important question so far or now, which is not what did he know and when did he know it. The point is he knows now. If you follow the what did he know and when did he know it to its logical conclusion, the point is what did he know and when did he know it? Because if he found out and after he found out didn't do the right things, then we're saying that's a problem. Well, we know. He knows for at least, he knows longer, but he knows at least publicly for 96 hours. And what has he done with that time? He's called it a hoax. He's lied about it. He said he didn't know. He's told 7 different stories and called it a hoax. So the point is he knows now.
Right, and he has yet to say if a foreign power, he could even say it in the abstract, right? He doesn't have to take on, his beloved President Putin, on its face. He could simply say,
Exactly.
If a foreign government is paying to kill American soldiers, I'm opposed to that. He hasn't said that.
Exactly, and he knows now. We know he knows.
Right.
We see him knowing.
Right.
We see him knowing, and he hasn't done anything. So he's committing the same crime he's trying to get away with in front of us.
I'm with you, Brian. I'm with you.
Again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Amen. Art in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Art, what's up? Thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. Art? No Art. Let's try Jeff in Boulder, Colorado. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, Tom. The memorial, the Robert Gould Shaw Memorial in Boston, that was the famous poem that Robert Lowell wrote in 1964. It was published. That the title of that poem was "For the Union Dead." That was the title of one of his collections as well, and that's one of my favorite poems. I think it's a great antidote to all the Confederate statues. It's a good reread, a good revisit, et cetera, one other
Okay,
poem
I'm making a note. I'll check it out when we get off the air.
Yeah,
For
I
the
mean,
Union
that's one of
Dead.
his most famous poems, one of his signature poems. The other poem that I thought was really timely, that was actually read after Trump was inaugurated, and it was penned, I think, 2 years before that, but it was by Warsaw Shire. It's called "What They Did Yesterday Afternoon." Anyway, that's a beautiful poem. I think it also, we need healing, Tom, and that this is what, great literature, great poetry, great art, this is what it does. This other business with the Confederate statues, it's absolute ridiculousness. Okay, thank you, Tom.
Well, yeah, but except it's not ridiculousness, Jeff. I mean, this is a movement that's not just trying to reinvent the history of the Civil War, but is trying to perpetuate white supremacy. I mean,
Understood,
that's really the
Tom.
bottom line here.
Understood.
Yeah.
And Hickenlooper has the best chance of taking down Gardner. I think he's a. What can you say? He's milquetoast, but he's gonna take down Gardner, and that's what we need. Okay, take care.
Yeah, and he's a known name, and hope springs eternal. The entire Democratic Party is moving more progressive. Hopefully, Hickenlooper is too. Jeff, thank you for the call, and I'll check out those poems for the Union Dead and what they did yesterday afternoon when I get off the air. We'll be right back. Stick around. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with a hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Hey, we have a special new video up for supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com. And it's about how FDR in 1944, in fact, January 44, in his State of the Union address, talked about how important it was to add rights to the Bill of Rights. The original Bill of Rights was all political rights. He said it's time to enshrine economic rights in our Constitution. I would add, like most of the governments of Europe have done. And this includes the right to housing, the right to food, the right to a good job that pays well, the right to an education, including a college education, and the right to health care. It is pretty powerful stuff. And frankly, I think that what this coronavirus crisis is proving is that we are all in this together, and that Reagan's thing about government is never going to help you was just a load of crap. And so you can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Ronald in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hey, Ronald, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First, I would like to thank you for your show. I had an interesting conversation yesterday with a friend of mine that's a strong Democrat, and it has to do with religion. I'm not going to get into what one, but friends of this person who are well-educated people firmly believe that the Democrats want us to get the vaccine for COVID, but that there's going to be a chip in every vaccine shot.
I know. There's a friend of mine who's a newspaper publisher sent me a link this morning to this movie that's on Facebook. It's circulating through all the right-wing Facebook sites, and that's where these guys are getting it, because Zuckerberg will not put a stop to this kind of stuff. And it's insanity. It's just insanity. But, probably even worse, though, Ronald, is that the Food and Drug Administration today, under the supervision of, one of Donald Trump's toadies, said that we are so committed to getting a vaccine out in October so that Donald Trump can claim victory over the virus when, in November 3rd, that we will accept a vaccine that's only 50% effective, which is crazy.
Wonderful.
I mean, the polio vaccine is 98% effective.
Yeah. Oh, man. It's just pathetic what's going on, and it's pathetic.
It's a friggin' scam. Yeah. No, it is. Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. And the problem is that you've got, In particular, I lay most of this at the feet of Facebook. You've got a major social media network that has not taken this stuff seriously for years, and so it's festered and grown, and it's made Mark Zuckerberg billions, and it made Donald Trump president. But I don't see either of those two things as any kind of social good. Ronald, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Gabe in Wilmington, North Carolina. Hey, Gabe, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi there. I just wanted to make a quick little comment regarding the Confederate statues, regarding them being placed into museums. And I read that some museums, they want them removed from there. And personally, I think, I don't stand for the statues at all. But in my opinion, it's kind of like it's like taking Jim Crow and anti-African American merchandise out of museums, out of black museums. I mean, yeah, the message is terrible and it's bad. It shouldn't be said at all.
There's a huge difference, Gabe. If you are looking at if you go to the National Museum of African American History, you're going to see Jim Crow memorabilia, and you're going to see the people being beaten and the racists justifying that. That's a way of educating people about the horrors of slavery and then legal segregation for a century in this country. A statue of a traitorous general is the glorification of white supremacy and white racism. Period. Full stop. And frankly, I don't think that even belongs in our museums. If somebody wants to put together a museum, diorama or display or something about the backlash, the white racist backlash against the end of slavery or against the end of segregation, legal segregation in the United States, then, fine, do a display that's, like 15 feet long and, that has a bunch of pictures in it. But we don't need to be putting 25-foot high statues inside museums. Museum space is way too valuable.
Would you bang Howard Stern?
Yeah, right. Gabe, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back in just, I thought we were hitting a break. I guess we're not. The day Trump was briefed on Russian bounties, by the way, he was more interested in a play about the deep state. This is mind-boggling. Today is the day that the Gang of 8 are set to be briefed. Well, they just were, actually. And it turns out that the day that Donald Trump got briefed, the one day that we know of, February 27th, the one day that we know that he actually got briefed about the Russian bounties, was the day. The only things that were on his schedule for that day, other than getting briefed about the Russian bounties, because we know that on the February 27th, that was part of his presidential daily briefing. The other things that were on his schedule, in the morning he had a meeting with Diamond and Silk, and in the afternoon he attended, it was the other way around. That was the afternoon. In the morning, he spent the morning talking with the lead actors in a play about the love notes between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Honest to God. Trump met with the actors starring in an off Broadway production of FBI Lovebirds Undercovers. He was so fascinated by the topic that the meeting ran 3 times longer than it was scheduled. In the afternoon, Trump called in the press to see Diamond and Silk, along with a collection of, quote, Trump-friendly African-American media personalities, end quote, who described Donald Trump as, quote, the best president since Abraham Lincoln, end quote. And that was his day. That was his day. This is nuts. This is just absolutely nuts. We'll be back. It's coming up hitting the end of the hour here. I want to talk, when we come back from this break, we're going to talk with Robert Weissman, the president of Public Citizen, about how Trump is basically destroying our country physically, not just politically. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com.
Thank you.
For our Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today, we're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government, grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25th, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory, and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales. But we have become a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. That's Richard Belzer's new book, Corporate Conspiracies.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, we have moved from, as Grant Cart notes over at DU, with regard to Taliban Bountygate, we have moved from the crime to the cover-up. And there's a lot of concern and talk about, what did Donald Trump know and when did he know it and all this kind of stuff. But I think some of the underlying facts here are just not getting out. This is from the New York Times. This was a piece that was published yesterday in the New York Times, and it's just very straightforward. In a raid in Kunduz city, in the north of Afghanistan, about 6 months ago, U.S. forces arrested 13 people. This is a joint operation between American soldiers and the intelligence agency of the government of Afghanistan. It's called the National Directorate of Security. And this all comes from a guy by the name of Sulaifa Amory, who is the deputy provincial council chief there. So, basically the local mayor. And he points out, and it's been, verified now by the U.S. military, that they were going after people who were killing American soldiers and soldiers of the government of Afghanistan. Just explicitly going after them. And when they got there, when they got into this safe house or whatever it was in Kunduz city, they found that two of the main targets of the raid had already fled. One had gone to Tajikistan, and the other had gone to Russia itself. And then they went to the home of one of these two guys who fled, and it's not clear from the reporting whether it was the guy who went to Tajikistan or the guy who went to Russia, and they found $500,000 in cash. So then they started tracking back, where did he get this money from? And it turned out it had been wired to his account from an account, or to a Taliban account from an account in Russia. And that's been the basis of this assertion that the U.S. government has been making, and this was months ago, that that this is going on. And Donald Trump is saying, oh, it's a hoax, you know, it's there's nothing, there's no there. Okay, we talked about that. I was talking earlier, we've been talking about the monuments, and we've been talking about, you know, white supremacy and these monuments to racism in the United States. It gets worse. Back in October of 2006, the FBI put together a report. Now, keep in mind, this is 14 years ago. The FBI put together a report titled White Supremacist Infiltration of Law Enforcement. And it comprehensively detailed, how white supremacist organizations and white supremacists themselves have gone to work in police departments, have made friends with police officers, have reached out to police officers and police departments, evangelizing them in this ideology of white supremacy. And let's not make any mistake about this. White supremacy is an ideology. It is a belief system. It's not like a biological reality. There is no difference between people in at least in the context that white supremacists say with regard to intelligence or other abilities. There's no difference based on race. The only difference has to do with skin color. There's a few physical differences, but that's it. But the whole ideology of white supremacy, which has held this country since 1619, when Africans were first brought to the United States in slavery, in bondage. To this day, this whole ideology of white supremacy is based on this belief that white people are the most evolved, they're the most superior, they're the brightest, they're the smartest, they're the, fill in the blanks, right? And beliefs are contagious. If you don't think beliefs are contagious, let me introduce you to anybody who fought the Nazis. And Adolf Hitler's sales pitch to the German people was that they were the superior race, and not because they were white, because they were a subset of white people. They were the Aryan people, the white people who came from essentially Norway and Scandinavia. But, Hitler once said that, the Norwegians were the ultimate, God forbid, right? And so this whole ideology is contagious and poisonous. It poisons the people who are infected with it. It poisons the society that is infected with it. And now we find, well, actually in 2006, 14 years ago, we found, or the FBI found, that this white supremacist ideology had taken root in our police departments all across the country. Daryl Johnson, a former Department of Homeland Security analyst who wrote a report for the Department of Homeland Security back in 2009 about this topic, far-right violence. He said, we have anti-government groups now that are solely focused on law enforcement recruitment, like the Oath Keepers, the Constitutional Sheriff's Peace Officers Association, and the 3% militias. He said there's more infiltration by these types of groups than from actual white supremacists. But these groups are also hate groups because they hate Muslims, they hate immigrants. So there's also a concern. The problem, he said, if you look at extremist infiltration, has gotten 10 times worse than when our report was written in 2006. And it is more widespread. Travis Getty's writing about this over on Raw's Story. Experts say that law enforcement culture overlaps so much with white supremacy that infiltration is no longer necessary. Now, there's the whole culture of policing has merged or meshed itself with the whole culture of white supremacy. So how do we change this? I mean, yeah, you want cops to live in the neighborhood, but how do we cut this out of our this poison, this cancer? How do we cut it out of our society? Personally, I think that the way that we do it is by educating people, by letting them know what the actual history is, letting them know what the actual truth is. Now, you could call me a dreamer or a liberal and, if we just wake people up. But I think there's a lot of truth to that, and I don't think that you can beat this out of people or imprison it out of people, although I do think that anybody who has any association with white supremacy or white nationalism or any of these terrorist groups should be immediately fired from any police department, or frankly, any position that they have anywhere. We're seeing, some of these, Ivankas and Jareds, these Karens and Chads, being outed and losing their jobs. Well, it's a good thing. It's a good start. And more we're seeing, black people are carrying not just carrying cell phones. Everybody's carrying cell phones these days, but willing to pop them up and start recording when some white person goes crazy on them, which is like happening. Obviously it's happening every minute of every day, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year in America, but the videos of it are now starting to pop up, every few minutes. It's a good start. But is it going to take more to awaken white people in America? And if so, what might that more be? I've kind of run out of ideas. Do you have a suggestion? How do we wake up white people to the poison of white supremacy?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. Stick around. And welcome back. Elvis in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Elvis, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I love your radio show, brother. I just want to disagree with you about John Hickenlooper.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, remind me again. Did he drink a couple Rocky Floyd?
I missed your word there, and I'm not sure that it wasn't something that shouldn't be said on the air, so I'm just going to pass on that right now. John in Hillsboro, Oregon. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Well, it seems like symbolism is very strong. If you go back in ancient history, whether it be the Chinese, Egyptians, or the Romans, when they had, leaders from the past, they sort of made sure nobody remembered them by, etching out, their accomplishments or their ruling.
Yeah, sometimes, often literally, physically.
Yeah, well, like the first emperor of China, he buried alive all the intellectuals, which,
Well, Pol Pot did the same thing in Cambodia. He murdered anybody who had glasses, anybody who was literate.
Well, getting back to our backyard, I see this being almost, not exactly, but really kind of parallel. Back in 1953, Joey Stalin, after he died, there was a power struggle going on, and Nikita and company, they sort of they won. So in about 1956, 58, Nikita Khrushchev, I should say his last name, I'm sorry, right. He decided what they called de-Stalinization of Russia. So any kind of portraits, literature, or statues were torn down of him because he was really, he wasn't a nice guy. Okay, fast forward to about 70 years later, I see this as a de-Americanization. But the system did it to themselves. If you have information technology actually did it. You put policemen on right there killing people. Did they get away with it? Okay, well, you asked for it, America. If you're going to have your system murdering people, well, then I guess it's time to clean house, isn't it? And so that just opened up a can of worms. Just what you've been talking about.
Yeah, I would argue that that's what's happening, John. And in fact, after World War II, you had your de-Stalinization in the early 50s in the Soviet Union. You had denazification going on in Germany in 1946, 47, 48. And frankly, I think it's time for deconfederatization here in the United States. This whole idea that we should have statues memorializing people who were traitors to our country. When you think about it in that context, it is absolutely bizarre. And to have the President of the United States yesterday tweeting that this is our heritage and they're beautiful. Statues of traitors? Saying that he will, if an amendment that says that the military forts named after traitors to the United States get renamed, he's going to cancel, he's going to veto the defense appropriation bill. I mean, this is just bizarre stuff. It's just absolutely bizarre. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Stick around. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support it. Okay, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. What changed my mind? 55-year-old Pennsylvania resident John Crilly, who voted for Donald Trump. And then, a reporter reached out to him and said, well, why'd you vote for Trump? Or will you vote for Trump again? And he said, no. And so they asked the obvious follow-up question, what changed your mind? And he said, what changed my mind? 120,000 deaths. Trump refused to realize, oh, my God, there's a virus coming our way. Shouldn't we do something? COVID was the turning point. It's a thing that touches home with everybody. And I think that is absolutely the case. Is Robert Weissman on line 10? Cool. Great. Okay, on the line with us is the president of Public Citizen, Robert Weissman. Citizen.org is the website. And Robert, welcome back to the program. Tell us about Donald Trump's efforts now to basically destroy our environment and our country, in this case, vis-a-vis the Bureau of Land Management.
Yeah, well, it dovetails what you've been talking about, sadly. He's just named to run the Bureau of Land Management, which is part of the Department of Interior and does what it sounds like. It oversees the public lands. A man named William Perry Penley. This guy goes back to the Reagan era, and he is connected with what used to be called the Wise Use Movement, which is an extreme property rights and movement that believes in privatizing the public lands, has fascistic views of the role of the federal government, and is sort of built implicitly, and not so implicitly in his case, on racist views.
Wow. Did you say fascistic?
The only way that it's not fascistic is that they're so anti-government. It doesn't sort of dovetail with the sort of centralized power view of fascism. But it is extreme stuff about the need for private power. If you recall the sort of gangs of white gun owners who've taken over public land spaces, that's his crew. Sure. That's the sort of universe in which he flows, and he's now the guy, potentially, who's going to be in charge of the public lands.
So what's this guy's name again, and what did he do before this?
His name is William Perry Penley. He's worked in a right-wing think tank, but he goes back to work in the Department of Interior all the way back in the Reagan administration.
Does this require approval by the Senate? Is this the sort of nomination?
It does, and it's possible. He said such extreme things about the Black Lives Matter movement that he may run into trouble even in the Republican-controlled Senate.
Right. So is Public Citizen, we're talking with Robert Weissman, the president of Public Citizen, so are you guys calling on people to contact their members of Congress and say, hey,
yeah,
don't
absolutely,
confirm this guy?
And vote this guy down. So this would be a Senate vote, and It's not up yet, but he was just named to be the permanent director of the agency. He said, he wrote, we know the political movement spawned but with the name Black Lives Matter was built on a terrible lie.
Really?
That's our guy.
What's the lie in his world?
The lie is that Michael Brown's had his hands up.
Oh, geez. That's insane. That is insane. So, Robert, I know that you guys at Public Citizen are all over these issues in general. More broadly, we've got a fossil fuel lobbyist running the EPA and a fossil fuel lobbyist running the Department of the Interior, and the BLM is, sub to the Interior Department. What sort of damage are these guys doing in real time right now?
Well, at the EPA, they basically have had a policy since the coronavirus that they're not enforcing pollution laws. Their logic is twofold. One is that polluters, because of coronavirus, don't have the staff to do compliance, to make sure they're reporting to the agency, and second, that to get the economy going again, so-called, we need to get regulations out of the way. So in the name of dealing with a public health pandemic, we should further endanger the public health.
Did Trump do this by executive order, or is this the head of the agencies, the head of the EPA, just saying, "Here's the new way that we"? That
is policy from EPA. There are other agencies that have done similar things. Trump issued an executive order that sort of talked about this, but didn't have any real meaningful force of law. This is policy from the Environmental Protection Agency, and because it's an enforcement issue, they're not rolling. They're doing other things to roll back rules, and we and others are suing over those. But when they just say we're not going to enforce, there's almost nothing anybody can do.
Other than getting registered to vote and getting, making sure that you're going to get an absentee ballot and be able to vote, in November without taking your life in your hands, what else can Americans do to push back on this? Or is this do we really need a political, to paraphrase Bernie, revolution in this country, at the very least throwing Trump out of office and his buddies?
Well, both and. I mean, so of course I'm a follower and I'm with you that we do need the political revolution. And, one thing I think we've seen with the Black Lives Matter approach is when people get out in the streets, things change, and they can change really fast. So, of course, we need that. Mm-hmm. And also, we need to do things like protest the specific nomination. I mean, this is a case where the guy is so extreme, I think Republicans, especially in an election year, are going to have trouble ushering him through. So if the public weighs in and says, vote down William Perry Penley, there's a real chance that the Senate will block his nomination from moving forward.
And the number for the switchboard at Congress is 202-224-3121. And you can call and say, I'd like to speak to my senator. If you're not sure who your senators are, all of us, unless you live in D.C., have two of them. And the operators there will simply tell you. You just tell them what state. And this is the Senate, not the House of Representatives. Robert, you guys are doing such great work there. I am so appreciative of what you do. And, keep it up.
Thanks so much, Tom. Always great to be with you.
Thank you. Good talking to you. Robert Weissman, president of Public Citizen. Citizen.org is the website. You can follow at public_citizen or Rob_Weissman, Weissman. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back. It's your media support group for We the People. Today we're reading from David Enrich's book, Dark Towers, Deutsche Bank, Donald Trump, and an Epic Trail of Destruction. This is from Chapter 10. It's titled The Mar-a-Lago Prize. In 1905, a German immigrant living in the Bronx set up a small barber shop on the ground floor of a newly constructed building at 60 Wall Street, in the heart of Manhattan's booming financial district. In an era before skyscrapers, the 25-story L-shaped tower was a landmark, its gargoyle-guarded roof visible from the nearby waterfront. The barbershop thrived, offering shaves and trims to a procession of bankers, stock exchange traders, lawyers, and office workers. Barber's name was Frederick Trump. The same year that he opened the shop, his wife gave birth to a boy named Fred. Many years passed, and the barbershop closed, and the old 60 Wall Street gave way in 1989 to a new 60 Wall Street, a 47-story tower topped with a distinctive pyramid roof. For a time, it was home to J.P. Morgan and Company. Then the bank left, and in 2005, Deutsche Bank started relocating its American staff, displaced ever since 9/11, to its new home at 60 Wall Street. And so Frederick Trump's grandson, born to Fred's wife in 1946, became an occasional visitor to the site of his grandfather's old barber shop. Deutsche's relationship with Donald Trump had only deepened since Mike Offit left. Justice Justin Kennedy, this is the son of Justice Anthony Kennedy, Justin Kennedy, now a managing director, had become a key point contact for Trump and helped chaperone large real estate deals for him through the bank. Kennedy's role was to find customers to buy portions of loans after Deutsche dispensed the money, a process that allowed Deutsche Bank to make larger loans than it otherwise could have. Kennedy sometimes sat with Trump in his luxury box at the U.S. Open tennis tournament or at Manhattan nightclubs, where Trump would park himself at a table in the corner facing outward, holding court like a mafia don. Now, with Kennedy's encouragement, Deutsche hurried along a Henry Villard-like path. In 2000, the bank had plunked down another $150 million to be used for the renovations of Trump's building at 40 Wall Street. The next year, Deutsche agreed to extend Trump a mortgage worth more than $900 million, at the time the largest ever on a single property, so he could buy the General Motors building on the southeastern corner of New York's Central Park. Trump already owned half of the 50-story building. He wanted the rest. And in 2002, Deutsche agreed to refinance about $70 million that he owed on some of his Atlantic City casinos. Those loans came out of Deutsche's commercial real estate division, which Kennedy was helping to run. Not everyone was enamored with Trump. Seth Waugh, W-A-U-G-H, one of Edson's many Merrill Lynch recruits and the head of Deutsche's American operations, learned around 2001 that the bank was planning to lend Trump about $500 million to use as he wished, basically an unrestricted cash infusion to stabilize the developer's flagging finances. Waugh had previously witnessed up close the carnage that Trump could inflict on imprudent financial institutions. At Merrill, Edison had assigned him the task of mopping up after Trump defaulted on nearly $700 million of bonds that Merrill had helped sell for his Taj Mahal casino in Atlantic City. Waugh was in no hurry to repeat the experience at Deutsche. He voiced strong objections to the proposed new loan to Trump, in which Trump would not have had to put up any hard assets as collateral, and the deal soon died. Yet Deutsche's broader Trump relationship rumbled on. In 2003, another arm of Deutsche, focused on helping companies raise money by selling stocks and bonds to investors, agreed to work with Trump. The point man on this part of the relationship was Richard Byrne, another Merrill veteran who had been involved in the Taj Mahal debacle. Byrne had helped sell the ill-fated Taj bonds to investors. Now Trump hired Byrne's group at Deutsche to issue bonds for his troubled Trump Hotel and casino resorts. Byrne knew this would be an uphill battle. Not only had Trump defaulted in the past, but he also had recently been taunting investors that he might stop paying back other outstanding bonds. Waugh didn't warn Byrne about the recently rejected $500 million loan, and so Byrne organized a roadshow for Trump to meet with and try to win over big institutional investors. He escorted Trump to meetings all over New York and Boston. At every stop, boardrooms and auditoriums were jammed with traders, fund managers, senior executives, and secretaries curious to see the Donald show, and Trump didn't disappoint. He rocked, he rolled, and he delivered wildly optimistic and inconsistent financial projections. Afterward, Trump called Byrne to ask how much money they'd raised. The answer, alas, was virtually zero. Byrne braced for an explosion as he explained to Trump that though he'd been treated like a celebrity, nobody trusted him with their money. Trump took the rejection in stride. "Let me talk to your salespeople," he requested. Byrne agreed, and Trump came to deliver a pep talk. "Fellas, I know this isn't the easiest thing you've all had to sell," he acknowledged, "but if you get this done, you'll all be my guests at Mar-a-Lago." Trump was always good at pushing an audience's buttons. A weekend with Trump at Mar-a-Lago bragging rights that not even money could buy. And this new incentive did the trick. The salesman worked the phones, cast a wider net for more clients, and managed to sell an impressive $485 million of junk bonds, albeit at a high interest rate that reflected investors' fears that Trump might default. The book Dark Towers by David Enrich. On the Science Revolution this week, Dr. Michael Mann with the Earth Systems Science Center at Penn State University is here on the impact of the Arctic hitting a whopping 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, the hottest temperature on record for the Arctic. Should we be worried? Professor Jeffrey D. Sachs drops by on COVID-19 reversing globalization. And the Toxics Program advocate with U.S. Public Interest Research Group, Danielle Melgar, is on the show. Why are we ignoring rocket fuel in our drinking water? Tune in wherever fine podcasts are available. Hey, we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for people who are supporters of our program. On this one, I'm digging into, or actually kind of taking issue with, a new article that's over on thenation.com, titled, Could Coronavirus End Globalization? And they've got a bunch of analysts who are weighing in on this sort of thing. And my take is that this is going to be even bigger than that. This depression that we are sliding into, it is being softened right now by the Federal Reserve throwing $6 trillion at America's largest corporations. 1/3 of all economic activity for a year in the United States. Twice the annual federal budget. The Fed has just parked $6 trillion with a couple of hundred big companies. And it's just masking what's coming. It's going to get bad, and it could become fascist. And so check it out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com, for the people who support our program. Thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Steve in Zimmerman, Minnesota. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom.
Steve? Okay, I'm going to put Steve on hold here, and we'll go to Bill in Richmond, Virginia. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Oh, Tom, thanks.
Bill in Richmond?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Sure. What's
Tom?
up? I do.
Oh,
what's up?
Okay. What I'm calling about is
I hear you, Bill, just fine. What's on your mind today?
I'm talking about the 23 days of protest that we've had in Richmond. And the irony of it is that basically, the protests I have no problem with. But the problem that's come about is that the protesters, and I don't care about the Confederate statues. That doesn't make one to me. But they were tearing down Confederate statues, even though a law had been passed allowing for it to be done, like the day July 1st. But the other thing about it that's so bad is the businesses that were impacted in Richmond were primarily owned by ethnic citizens. And Richmond has never had historically.
So Bill, let me get this straight. Are you saying that we shouldn't be taking down these statues because it's hurting businesses that are owned by black people? Is that your excuse here?
No. What I'm saying is the damage done.
What am I misunderstanding?
The damage is done to businesses that are in predominantly black neighborhoods, which a certain amount are owned by blacks. But what I'm saying is this: if everything is about the rule of law, why could they have not waited until the law went into effect, like the day July 1st, and then taken the statues down? The city's got crews over there right now doing it. That's the problem I've got with it.
Yeah. Okay. I think that we're splitting hairs here, Bill. If the city says we're going to take down the statue, and people are like, no, we're not going to wait. We want to tear it down. We want to feel good. We want to, get whatever. You can kind of understand people. I mean, you can understand people saying, okay, enough is enough. We're going to take them down. But you can also make the argument that, you should wait till the city takes them down. I think that this is all a distraction from the larger issue, and it's a huge distraction. And it's a distraction that probably is playing very well right now on right-wing hate radio, that says that it's not about statues to traitors. That's not the subject here. The subject is not that every time there was a serious civil rights movement in the United States in the 1890s, in the 19-teens and 20s, and in the 1960s and 70s, these three bursts of statue erecting, mostly in the South. About 90% of these statues are in the former Confederate states. And each time there was a civil rights movement, statues went up to traitors, to generals who fought to preserve slavery, period, full stop. And many of them were very clear in their writings and in their public statements that they were fighting to protect slavery. The secession documents of South Carolina, Georgia, and other slave states all said explicitly that they were separating from the North and declaring war on the North in order to preserve slavery. And in fact, several of them that they wanted to expand slavery into the North. But these people were traitors to America. They were traitors to the idea of America. They were traitors to the nation itself. And every time the civil rights movements got a little traction, up go the monuments to another traitor from the South. And frankly, a discussion about, gee, should we be taking them down this week or should we wait until next week because of the rule of law, is a total BS argument. The simple reality is we've got statues to traitors all over the United States. How do you think Germans would respond if somebody tried to put up a statue to Adolf Hitler? I just don't think it would work, Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wondered, have you been, I know you're familiar with the Southern Poverty Defense League. Well, they had
Law Center,
they put through a very sweeping article about the 970 plus hate groups that we have in our country. And it's very, very, like you said before, it's very, very evident that the infiltration of the police department by these radicals and really horrible men is the cause of this. And I think the best thing that the police can do is to vet all the policemen, look for that swastika on their underarm or wherever, get rid of the
it's not that obvious, Joan. Sadly,
well,
they don't.
I know, but
they're not wearing a badge that says "I'm a white racist."
Well, they are. They're probably doing something. And one of the things is this freedom of speech, that nobody ever finishes the sentence. You are entitled to free speech and free action as long as it doesn't interfere with another's free speech and action. And nobody ever finishes that question or that comment. They always
or the public safety.
I have free speech. Yeah, but I do too. So if you interfere on mine, that's not okay. And if I interfere with yours, that's not okay. And that's what's happening. These hate groups have been allowed to exist in this country. There's 5 in Minnesota. They're in Montana. They're all over the United States. And they need to be vetted. They need to be named. They need to be listed by name, and they need their arms taken, the guns and things taken away from them, because they're the ones that
named, shamed, and disarmed.
Yeah, and
Sounds
they
like
need.
Jonah, I'm with you. I am absolutely with you. Thank you very much for the call. It's 42 minutes past the hour. Brent in Sarasota. Hey, Brent, what's on your mind today?
Not much, Tom. A lot of people forget, before Trump got elected and before the first time he was flirting with running before he got embarrassed at the press conference dinner, he told in an interview that he had Mein Kampf on his nightstand for reading material, if I remember the interview.
No, his first wife said that in either her divorce papers or in her biography, or autobiography. I don't recall which, but that was Ivana who said that he had a copy of Hitler's collected speeches, not Mein Kampf, Hitler's collected speeches on the bedside next to his bed.
Well, there's no doubt that the man takes from Mussolini and Hitler liberally in his addressing people. He's definitely a fascist of the first order. I haven't liked the guy since the 80s. And it's crazy to me. Like, the day that he was elected, I literally thought I woke up in a different world. I was like, I can't believe that the American people actually fell for that. But
yeah, well, they didn't. 3 million of us said no to him, and it's just our vote didn't count because of the Electoral College, because of slavery.
Exactly. But anyways, I just kind of losing focus there for a second. But with what's going on with the white power, him backing it, this is the same stuff that happened in Germany. I mean, I read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by the time I was 16. And between that, Saul Lewinsky, some other writers, that really informed my thinking as I looked at the worldview. And you can't mistake the similarities. I mean, there's economic issues, which are always bubbling underneath here. You've got great competition. There's bigotry and prejudice in every culture across the world. Whether or not they let go of slavery 100 years ago, 500 years ago, those same prejudices get replayed out with different generations of different people. I mean, look what happened with the Irish and the Italians. First, they were oppressed, they were prejudiced, but then they became part of the system, and then they put that pressure onto the next culture that was being oppressed. And it's really about the socioeconomic stratification, and the fascists are there to back that because that's what keeps them in power. That's why I really think republicanism is kind of the first step of fascism's development within the world. Because if you don't have the republic, if you don't have these legislators...
Finish your thought, Brad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're very welcome. Sorry.
Brent's phone failed. The Republican Party, first of all, I wouldn't say it's republicanism because, that has to do with people who believe in a republic, not the Republican Party. The Republican Party's gone off the rails, but it's turned into a death cult. That's all they are.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The Republican Party is now officially a racist death cult. 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Chuck in Issaquah, Washington. Hey, Chuck, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking the call. I wanted to ask you about the Electoral College. I've recently been getting emails from what I think is a new group called Abolish the Electoral College, but I haven't seen any explanation of how they want to go about accomplishing that. What are the different paths? I mean, I think a constitutional amendment is, just blowing in the wind. So what are the other avenues that could be looked at to accomplish the same end?
Right. First of all, let me caution you. We know that there are literally hundreds of right-wing groups that have been created in the last 3 years in the wake of the Trump. Many of them started with Trump's candidacy, that purport to be issues groups that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're on quote issues of importance to Trump supporters, and most of that money is just going into the pockets of the people who started the groups. These are just scams. Now, I don't know if this anti-electoral college group is one of those scams or not, but to the best of my knowledge, there's only two ways to get around the Electoral College. The first is to strip it out of the Constitution, and that would require a constitutional amendment. And as you point out, Chuck, that ain't going to happen. Constitutional amendments, there have only been, 27 of them in the history of the United States. There's been over 29,000 proposed. So, it just doesn't, that's not going to happen. The other way is the Interstate Compact, and it's called the National Popular Vote Compact. The website is nationalpopularvote. I forget what it is, com or org. And what that does, and you've got, once you've got enough states that have signed on to represent, 50% plus one of the electoral votes, then each one of those states commits that whoever the presidential nominee is who gets the majority of the popular vote, they will cast their electoral votes for that person, thus guaranteeing that whoever gets the majority vote in the Congress will become the president of the United States. And that's a program that's worth supporting. It's a program that's worth pushing your legislators to sign on to. You've got a whole bunch of states that have already jumped on board. We have another one state that just picked this. I believe it was Virginia, just signed on to this in the last couple of months. We need a couple more large states, but that's the way to do it, Chuck. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. I was aware of that way of going about it. So we really do need to reach out and get our states to sign on to that.
Yes. And not just, and yes, this is a matter of talking to your state legislators, your governors, but also to your federal legislators, just because they play a consequential role in state politics, a very big role in state politics. And so very often when something is happening in your particular state and you want to have some influence over it, calling your member of the House of Representatives or even your senator, although that's probably less likely to produce results, but calling your member of the House of Representatives and saying, this isn't a federal issue. This is an issue that has to do with Washington State or Wisconsin or whatever. But here's my concern. They're going to those meetings. They're hanging out with the state party leaders. They're hanging out with the state politicians. They know what's going on, and they have considerable influence. Chuck, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for listening to KBCS. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. So we've got a new video over at ThomHartmann.com for people who support our program. It's about private equity firms, Mitt Romney's company, Bain Capital, and Steve Schwarzman's Blackstone, and some of these private equity groups have long been considered risky investments. I mean, billionaires put money into these things, but and sometimes they produce really high returns, but they also have huge fees, and they operate kind of like a black box. There's all kinds of hidden stuff. And what they have been salivating about for years, Schwarzman talked about this just a few days after Donald Trump was inaugurated, was they wanted to get their hands on people's 401ks and IRAs, people's retirement money, their pension funds. And it's been illegal. And Trump and Eugene Scalia, the head of the Labor Department, just legalized this practice. The consequences could be dramatic. The video's over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Ed in Aberdeen, South Dakota. Hey, Ed, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I was just going to point out that our Governor, Kristi Noem, is having this big ceremony at Mount Rushmore on July 3rd, and the president's coming. She is spending $350,000 of our taxpayer money in South Dakota to pay for the 18-minute fireworks display instead of the Trump campaign paying for it. And they've estimated that the total cost of the state will be around $600,000 in security costs. Yeah. And she's been all over our news last evening and yesterday promoting this thing and encouraging. She wants about 20,000 people to show up if possible. And she's bragging that there'll be no social distancing and you only wear a mask if you feel like it. They're even cordoning off Main Street of Rapid City, South Dakota, and setting up a big screen TV for overflow crowd there. This thing is a disaster waiting to happen. The Park Service people are encouraging her to cancel it because of the fire danger. The retired superintendent of Mount Rushmore is saying that this is a mistake, and she's just bound and determined to have this thing go ahead at our expense, at taxpayer expense.
Wow. She must be one of those Republican politicians who literally only watches Fox News and gets all their news from Fox News and believes that everything that they're saying is true. Either that or Donald Trump.
And she's on almost every night on Fox News. She's on Laura Ingram's show constantly. Yes. In fact, when she got elected governor, she even designed her own studio in the state capitol just so she could be on Fox News and doesn't let any other local media have access to it. She's also a person, when she was in Congress, when they passed the Affordable Care Act, she touted it as was going to have all the death panels because of the Affordable Care Act, and she's never been called on that one. She's
so you guys
also
have your
with the
very own
rumors
Sarah Palin there.
Yeah, we do. Exactly. And she's bucking for a presidential appointment if Trump gets reelected. That's what all the local media is reporting, the rumors that are going on.
What does she want to be appointed to?
Well, there's actually a rumor that she could be his vice presidential nominee, which would be really bizarre.
Yeah, I think it's, given how unpopular Trump is and how he's crashing in the polls, I think what's more likely to play out is that Trump decides not to run for re-election. Pence runs for election. Maybe he picks her, I don't know, as VP. That would make sense this time around. And then Pence pardons Trump, if he gets elected. I just don't think there's a chance that he gets elected without a lot of nefarious stuff, but pretty amazing. Okay, Ed, thanks for the heads up and the report from South Dakota. Keep us up to date and look forward to talking to you next week as doing a post-mortem on it. Thank you. Dave in Inverness, Florida. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, just a couple things here. The hypocrisy. The police have, historically have been used to bust up unions. You remember back in the early 1900s, and yet they got the strongest union now. I mean, they got qualified immunity. And the other thing is that bothers me, and I called last week. I couldn't wait, but to lie to the police is a felony, but they can lie to us and extort information from us. And something's wrong, Tom. They've gained way too much power. And a friend of mine, well, he's an ex-friend actually. He's the chief of police down here, and we got into it about when they murdered all those LGBT people down in Orlando. But anyways, he told me at the time that when he was he's a sheriff of Buffalo, New York. He had to get rid of 30% of the people that came in there. This is after training, Tom, because he says they beat people up, just violent people. And he had to get rid of 30% of them down here when he was the chief of police here in Inverness, Florida, because he says they're what do they call psychopaths? I said I can't say his name, but I said so. I mean, they're the type of people that will pay you to work for you, so they go out and beat people up. It's real, Tom. He got rid of 30% of them.
Yeah,
and it's scary to me. This is fascism. They are the tools of fascism. We better do something about it, especially with all the warfare equipment that they have. He's the one explained to me, by the way, about the LEAF Act, Tom. The Law Enforcement Enhancement Fund.
Right.
So,
and I'm assuming that through Reagan's 1033 program, he's getting lots of military hardware and all that kind of stuff for the local Florida Police Department. Yeah. This is
whether you want it or not.
Issue.
I mean, this is it. So
really, they get stuff even if they don't ask for it.
They don't have to. It's a surplus, Tom. It's a giveaway.
Yeah, you're right. Dave, thanks for the call. What a story. What a story. Thanks so much for being with us today. Keep your eye on the news. We've got several major Trump scandals happening that I'm sad for my country. He's let over 100,000 Americans die. Is doing nothing about it whatsoever at the federal level. And then, this just treason against the United States. It's just mind-boggling. Anyhow, we'll continue our conversation tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, democracy doesn't happen without you. So get out there, get active, tag you're it, and be nice to yourself and people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann.
See you tomorrow.
Audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.